Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I don't know how to classify exactly what I just watched. I just know that it caused pain.
Well, I believe that was football. So we cannot classify that as cruel and unusual punishment because it is technically it's entertainment. But man, does that tell you how, the law and technicalities can really get at you? I mean, it would violate, I think, the spirit of the Constitution to show this game to prisoners, but certainly not the letter of the law.
Yeah, that was entertainment in a way that a lot of those banned websites from the late 90s with like torture porn on it, it's entertainment in that sort of I wanted to look away a lot of this game. This was, I can't, it's hard to describe a victory yet again by the Minnesota Vikings where I'm this flabbergasted afterwards. It hurt my brain to watch, and we'll get into it here in just a moment. Thank you guys so much for your listening to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We have a game to recap against the Chicago Bears. The Vikings were victorious in spite of themselves, and we also have a little bit of analytics to talk about as far as what was going on with everyone calling for the heads of the analytics departments this weekend. Really, the week isn't over yet because there's games that are going to be played tomorrow too, so why are we bothering?
Jesus. Oh my God.
And this really is the longest week. And let's also get into the mailbag. But before we start, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. And a special thank you to everyone who came out to Duffy's this weekend in Fargo for the what was going to be the JMU celebration. That it came up a bit short thanks to an amazing interception in the end zone and a lot of screwy clock management, not by either team, but by the Fargo Dome itself. So
yeah, that was pretty remarkable. I definitely recommend hitting our Patreon recap. Also, definitely super shout out to all the people that showed up to Duffy's. After the game, I ended up not paying for a lot of drinks, so thank you for that.
That's really the whole reason why we got into the podcast game, I guess.
It was all worth it for that.
For that. So thank you guys so much for coming out. Really do appreciate it. A couple names are like half there. Not that I half remember them, but just I'm terrible with names, so apologies. I remember Zen Cupid specifically being out there, and a couple of other guys. Thank you guys so much. Really do appreciate it. It was really cool to catch up with you guys. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for buying a couple of drinks, but thanks for having a couple of laughs with us over this whole thing. The game was fun. Our pictures ended up on JMU social media.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's that. Arif is inching ever closer to that elusive honorary degree, and we're working toward it. But again, thank you guys so much for coming out. That was really cool. And let's talk just a little bit about helping support the show. If you'd like to help the show financially, you can do so in a couple of different ways. Patreon.com/NorseCode is probably your best bet. You get bonus episodes along with other bonus material, occasional Zoom watch-alongs and all that. Over the last week, I put up 2 bonus episodes up there. One was the recap of the James Madison game, and the other was some pre-show stuff. So check that out over at patreon.com/NorseCode. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well and donate there. That's more of a one-time donation. The other one is more of a $3.50 per month to get access to that. Or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up your holiday items today. Although I think it's a little late to be picking up holiday items, you can still maybe catch something before the end of the year. So all of that aside, let's get into the game itself. And I want to ask a kind of an important question here. What exactly does it take to either get fired or ejected in Chicago?
Yeah, I saw someone suggest that Nagy just kind of go full bore and just tackle a ref on the field. That, I think, might have gotten him ejected.
Well, you don't watch baseball all that often. So what I can say is that Ron Gardenhire, when he was the coach for the Twins, every once in a while,
I believe the word is manager, right?
Oh, manager. Yes, sorry. Yes, you don't watch baseball, so let me start talking about baseball and use a baseball term. Also, it's the wrong baseball term. Thank you for that. I appreciate the correction. This game is clearly doing a lot for me. But when Gardenhire was the coach of the Twins, and subsequently when he was the coach for other teams as well, there is just a moment where you have to stand up to the umps and get kicked out of a game. And sometimes it's to like fire up the fans. Sometimes it's because it's the right call. Sometimes it's just because you don't really want to sit and watch this game any longer. And Gardenhire was the king of, all right, it's time to get ejected. And he'd go out to the mound, or he'd go up to first base where the umpire is, and you throw the hat, you scream, you kick dirt on you do something. It almost seemed like Nagy was just like inches from that moment. And you know what? I wouldn't have blamed him.
Yeah. The refs were awful. There are obviously moments in the game where the Bears, were committing obvious penalties, some of which weren't called. I think the one of the Kirk Cousins interception, a lot of people will remember. They probably should have ejected Tevin Jenkins. And there are probably other instances where, there are clear penalties or there are penalties that the refs called. But you mostly just remember the chicanery. I mean, there were bad calls and non-calls for both teams. I think it's probably fair to say that the Bears got screwed more by bad calls and non-calls than the Vikings did, which is not a fantastic thing to try and dissect and think about. But yeah, I mean, so there was a new rule this year, for example, that prevented offensive and defensive players, and a lot of people thought this would affect offensive players more. I believe it's been called more on defensive players to chop block outside of the tackle box. And that was one of the penalties that was called, but that was clearly not a chop block. I mean, he was going for a tackle. He actually made the tackle, and he got a penalty that extended the Vikings. I believe it was on a third down, but either way, it extended the Vikings' drive. There's another penalty on that very same drive that did make a ton of sense. I know that there are people that didn't think the Darnell Mooney catch was a touchdown, and honestly, that's close enough for it to not be a touchdown. I think either call would have been correct. I probably would have called it a touchdown, though. So on the 50-50 ones, it didn't go the Bears' way. On the kind of the more blatant ones that are not penalties, it went against the Bears. And then, obviously, the Vikings suffered their fair share of bad officiating too, including, I think, probably the Kendricks ejection didn't make a ton of sense to me.
Right around the time that challenge flags are being picked up because the refs are just going to take care of it, I'm not saying that the fix is in Illinois. I am saying I still don't understand what the hell happened there.
Yeah. It was weird that ended up being we're just don't worry about it. We're just going to review it. Pick that back up. I know you like to make a whole scene about challenges, which, by the way, can we talk about how he makes a challenge a production? I've seen coaches kind of make a big deal of challenges. I know Mike McCarthy does that sometimes. I know the throws to challenge are sometimes a little bit too theatrical. Pete Carroll does it a little bit. Bill Belichick even sometimes will ham it up a little bit, but I've never seen what Nagy's done. With
that was he might as well have screamed Kamehameha as he threw that into the dirt. Exactly.
Gathering his energy. Yeah.
It slows down. It zooms in on the impact. You hear a ching, and then you watch dust fly up.
I would have loved that would have been maybe the best use of the quote-unquote 8K cameras that the NFL has been using all season. Ones with the very short length or focal length that gives you the incredibly high clarity up close. That would have been perfect.
That would have been amazing. Yeah, the Vikings were bailed out a number of times on terrible penalties that may or may not have happened. And the Bears just kept doing this game. At one point I broke out the optimism shotgun, but it was more just because I needed to break something. The Vikings could have been trusted here, but all right. First things first. The Vikings' offensive plan here was to run the ball against a team that didn't have any starting corners. And the only reason why Cousins didn't have 1,000 yards is because the offensive line couldn't hold anything together. Is that somewhat of an accurate sentence?
Yeah, so I think kind of regardless, the Vikings should have thrown the ball a lot more. Zimmer said a couple of times that they should have thrown the ball less, especially in the first half, which is baffling to me, but they should have thrown the ball a lot more. Zimmer mentioned after the game in the presser that they were playing a ton of not just too high, but like umbrella coverages where you might have 4 high or whatever. They're taking away the deep shots, which, like, fine. Take the intermediate shots. It doesn't mean you always have to throw it to CJ Ham, those intermediate shots. I think one of the plays where the broadcast demonstrated a throw to short might have actually been to CJ Ham. Jefferson was taken away, and fine, whatever. The route that Jefferson was running was right into another player who's bracketed, fine. But Osborne was open, right? He's been having a good couple of games. I feel like you just adjust the routes to take advantage of the extra space that the Bears are giving over the middle, and that's probably going to get you more yards than a run, right? Because when the Vikings were running at their best, they were running at like a 4.8 yards per clip, but that didn't last very long. I think they finished like 3.3 yards per carry, something like that. All I know is that it is somehow less than their yards per attempt, which was 3.4, which is mind-boggling. And so that's kind of why you might say, hey, I guess maybe don't throw the ball as much, but I don't trust that Bears secondary to sustain that level of play. Because, they were all backups for Matt Nagy's an awful coach, but I'm going to guess that this group is just not that good given that they couldn't sign anywhere. They're mostly practice squad guys. It is pretty unlikely that the Bears accidentally found the same coaching staff that found all these other stars, right? Accidentally found 4 stars on the bench. They should have challenged. I mean, it's Justin Jefferson. They should have challenged that, I think, a lot more. And they didn't do that. So, yeah, Cousins had a bad game, and he threw 3.4 yards per attempt. He had a passer rating of 69. Nice.
87 yards.
87 total yards. And so, it was bad. But, this is kind of one of the instances where probably just throw yourself out of it. I know you have a lead, but you're at the risk of losing your lead with 4 consecutive 3-and-outs. So running the ball is not getting you those first downs you need to sustain possession and increase your likelihood of winning the game, a goal that you presumably have. So throw yourself out of it, and not with screens, right? Take advantage of the fact that these guys have had 1 week of practice and aren't good enough to run with some of the best receivers in the NFL.
And they were talking about how they didn't even get real practice. They had to do walkthroughs this week because of the quarantine happening at their facility.
Yeah, so they haven't. Yeah, okay, they haven't had any practice.
This wasn't even a real practice. This was just walk. If the Bears were even the slightest bit competent,
with that, and they should complicate things for a defense like that, right? Because run switch routes, make it difficult to figure out who's picking up who. Run rub routes, exploit plays that rely on a level of communication and chemistry in that sector, because they obviously are not going to have it. So why not do it? Why not run like Mills, right? Which I was making fun of in the previous episode about Justin Fields drawing up Mills on the sideline to take advantage of what the Vikings do. But I mean, that takes a level of communication, especially if you're in cover 4, to be able to nail the crosser and take the deep route, right? Find ways to force defenders into conflict that require, difficult zone handoffs to figure out who's taking what. But instead, they're running some curls, they're running some go routes, they're running some post routes without anything underneath to take them away. And it's not difficult for people to figure out what their assignment is. And so on the few plays that they have to play, they happen to play well. And it doesn't regress back to this awful mean where they get torched for another 200 yards. So,
Conklin
they absolutely
on a deep route. Conklin on a deep route.
On 3rd and 3.
On 3rd and 3, you have Conklin the tight end on a now don't get me wrong, I have him on
here's the
fantasy.
thing. He was open.
Fine. It doesn't matter. Like
he was open. You got to throw him if he's open.
This oh my god, this I am going to make it through this season if it kills me. But why? It doesn't.
I'm going to survive even if I die. Is that what you said?
Oh. No, I'm paraphrasing the Mountain Goats at this point. I'm going to make it through this season if it kills me. Like, I can't. this just. What is. Okay. I'm reaching again. I'm at that point where I just need to stop and take a breath and talk about how this became a 1-score game on the final play of the game. At a point where it was obvious that the Bears were not going to be able to like that drive was garbage to begin with, but it's turned into a 1-score game at the end. Really?
Yeah. Really? The fact that it turned into a 1-score game at the end is extremely funny to me. and like almost right because they didn't because the rules say that if we're at the end of regulation, which we were. And the game is not within 2 points, don't have the point after attempt. So that was an 8.1 score game. In spirit is a 7.1 score game. It feels like a loss, so I don't even know about that. But yeah, we end up with the 11th straight 1-score game, the 13th of 14 games that were within 1 score. The Vikings are 1 game away from tying the NFL record, which was set in 1994 by the New York Giants with 14 games, met once again by the 2015 Baltimore Ravens, and frankly, incredible. And so this improves the Vikings' 1-score game record, even though this is not an indication that the Vikings play well in close games. This game just didn't happen to be close until you backdoored your way in, which is kind of one of the issues with the 1-score game thing, is that sometimes that complicates things, and for a couple of teams, it makes them look better or worse than they are. I've talked about it in other articles where I talk about regression and stuff like that, but it's not as if the Vikings played well and then just gave up. They played horribly and got lucky a couple of times. And so it really is kind of spiritually a 1-score game after all of the analysis is over too. Like, even though it's not, and then it is, and then it's not, you could argue that it functioned like one because it featured all of the awful things about the Vikings that make them lose leads. Because the Vikings had a 10-point lead in this game, right? It doesn't feel like they did, but they had a 10-point lead. They had a 14-point lead in this game. The fact that it got that close, the fact that were it not for, I think, 3 failures on 4th down in the red zone, which, again, the Vikings are historically just a very awful 4th down team. If you take a look at 3rd down conversions for the last 5 years, so that includes like the elite 2017 season. So that is kind of putting the thumb on the scales a little bit. But for the last 5 years, 3rd down conversion rate, the defense is number 1 in the NFL. It's like 34%. Number 2 is Baltimore Ravens at 38%. It's not only that the Vikings are number 1, they're number 1 by a pretty significant distance over number 2. It's almost the opposite on 4th down. Not quite, as big, but they are the 8th worst team over that same time span in 4th down conversion rate. So they go from the very best to in the bottom third on 4th downs. And at the beginning of the game, it seemed like a little bit more of that. Obviously, they weren't able to sustain that level of 4th down production, which, of course, is going to invite a little bit more about the discussion about going for it and going for 2 and stuff like that. That doesn't matter. But, yeah, the Vikings put them into scoring position so many times that it might as well have been a 1-score game. So if the Bears had made that one kick, right, because they missed a kick, a 49-yarder, they'd have obviously, three more points, and then they'd hit. If instead of not going for it, let's just say they don't. Who cares what the numbers tell them to do? In this case, if they just kick a field goal and those are made, which is not part of the analysis that these field goals are automatic, which occurred in this game, a miss. But if those field goals are made, I think the Vikings, by the count, are losing. Let me double check that real quick. But by the time you get to that last drive, if we turn all these, because those turnovers on downs all occurred within, the Minnesota 21, the Minnesota 9, the Minnesota 14. So relatively speaking, for non-Vikings kickers, those are easy-ish makes. So if they make that field goal and then the next 2 field goals, so that would be 9 more points heading into, so it'd be 17-12 in theory, right? And the Vikings, things would change, right? Because the Vikings would have the ball on the 25 or something instead of on their own 9, but whatever, right? It'd be 17-12 as they hit that final drive, I think, right? Because you get the 3 plus the 9, yeah. As they hit the second to final drive, and that one, they've got about 4 minutes left, so they might kick, in which case it'd be 17-15. In which case, for that final, the drive with 152 left, they would only need a field goal to win. Now, mind you, this requires they make every field goal. They only made 50% of their field goals. Plus, their inability to convert on downs was insane. Honestly, like you would have expected them to complete one more of those. But given the situation, they almost certainly should have gone for it each of those times. But if they had made that field goal and then instead of going for it on 4th down, had gone for it, had kicked a field goal every single time, they would have been within 2 points of the Vikings, assuming nothing on the Vikings end changes, which is not necessarily fair, but they were 4 consecutive 3-and-outs, as they drove towards the final drive. And I think if that happens, I think everyone knows that the Vikings lose that game.
Okay. Let's talk about, before we talk about Kendricks' ejection, which is going to be a real fun topic, can we talk about the Kirk Cousins interception that you're likely going to see used by every single person who wants Kirk Cousins out of here next year? You're going to see clips of this on YouTube. You're going to see clips of this on podcasts, on video podcasts. You're going to see clips of this on Twitter, probably until he retires and maybe after. But this, without looking at the actual trip or the hold or whatever, this looked like the worst throw of Kirk Cousins' career.
Yeah. Right. On video without kind of any of the context, if you just take a look at Cousins, that looks like a truly, truly awful pick. One of the worst picks, not just for Cousins, but I think for any quarterback in their career. I don't think there are a lot of quarterbacks with picks that bad on their resume, right? Like, I don't know. You would have to challenge me to find like a Mark Sanchez pick that looks worse. I mean, that one looks bad. There is some additional context, which is that Jefferson was mugged, essentially. And because this occurs before the throw, it would have been probably a holding and not a pass interference, but would have given the Vikings a set of downs. It doesn't matter. But it was a penalty. It should have been a penalty that the refs missed. And so Jefferson would have been there running an over route from the slot. And, he might have hit Jefferson. He might not have. I don't know. But that's still on Cousins. Like, ultimately, it's on the refs, right? Like, that's their fault primarily. But it's still on Cousins. It's still a bad pick, I think. And I think this kind of demonstrates the trouble with Kirk Cousins, which is that he'll throw exactly kind of what the textbook tells him to throw based off of things like defensive alignment, right? Like, I know that I see that there's only going to be these 2 safeties. I know that the way that these cornerbacks are leveraged is that one cornerback is going to be trailing on the over route and the safety is going to hit up top. So I'm just going to have to lead the guy. And that's going to give me some 20-odd yards. And that's fine. And that's what the textbook tells me. And so he sees the lack of safety rotation after the snap. He knows that throw's there, and he throws it without, like, checking. Because one of 2 things happens if he checks to see if Justin Jefferson got beat the hell up. 1, he throws it at Jefferson's feet and gets the flag, which would have been the best move. Or 2, he throws it somewhere else. So he should have known, right? Because you can't know that your receiver is going to win off the release anyway. Like, I know that these slot corners are nothing. They were literally not getting paid a week ago, right? Like, these are not good slot corners. But you can't just assume that every single rep your receiver is going to run is going to win. And so he knows that the playbook created a win for him based off of this look, and he throws it. And he just didn't check to see if his receiver was there, because if it's a penalty, you got to draw attention to it, and you got to throw it at the feet of your tangled up receiver. If it's not a penalty, you've now thrown a pick, and it turns out it wasn't a penalty by the call on the field, which is obviously BS, but that's what happened. So it's certainly not as bad of an interception as it looks, right? Because he throws the right throw against the right defense, except Jefferson's not open because he's taking a nap. The biggest issue is that you can't say that Cousins throws that and then Jefferson hits the dirt, right? Like Jefferson is already on the ground before Cousins releases the ball in the pocket. So it's a bad throw. It is a bad decision, and it's very much in keeping with Kirk Cousins' paint by numbers style of offense, which, I mean, it usually doesn't create situational problems like this in the middle of games. It's usually a problem at the end of games or something like that. But here, it's just an example of how he threw what he saw. And what he saw was a defense giving him that throw, but that's not like the throw, right? So, yeah, it's kind of funny that Cousins gets to call this a Monday Night Football win because he's had some good games where he's lost a Monday Night Football, and so now he gets to have a bad game where he wins, and so that's kind of like reversing the thing about it. Like it's not even reversing the record; it's like reversing the thing about it. The I guess thing. Curse. Yeah.
Fun stat: he's never won two primetime games in a row until this moment.
Believe for him.
QB wins being a dumb stat as they are. We have this. All right, let's go to the Kendricks ejection. Right call, wrong call, and should these refs have been blasted to the sun?
Kendricks, right penalty, wrong ejection. Should not have ejected him. Should have penalized him. The refs obviously need to be blasted into the sun for this and various other crimes that they committed tonight or any other night. For prison abolition, except for refs, I guess is where I'm at. But I think that it's interesting because like there are arguments from Bears fans in my mentions, and so I'm not getting a good read on what people generally think. I'm like watching some of the national reaction to the ejection, and a lot of it's just wow and not like did it make sense or not. But I feel like nationally most people are on the side of Vikings fans on this one because the penalty occurs as Kendricks is getting up, essentially. So when Justin Fields gets hit, he obviously slides down in order to gain QB protection, and both runs into and is run into by Kendricks. So Kendricks isn't moving his feet forward all that much. He's breaking down a tackle, assuming that Justin Fields is going to continue running. And so he's getting into a tackle stance to make sure that happens. So he has to get low, right? That's just part of tackling. And then Fields starts sliding. And as a result, Kendricks begins to get up. But he doesn't get up all the way because I think he's trying to tap Justin Fields down, which is not smart because Fields is giving himself up. So just get out of the way when that happens. But it's difficult. It's like a split-second decision. And so as he's getting up, which, by the way, getting up is a way to avoid the hit, right? Like, he's not driving down. Like, I think if it was intentional, I think if it was meant to cause injury or harm or just to teach a quarterback a lesson about running or whatever, I think he would be driving down, not getting up. And on his way up, his helmet hits Justin Fields' helmet. So it's a penalty. There's no question about that. The announcers were talking about how Fields slides sitting up. And, I don't really pay that much attention to it, but that's a good point, I guess. Makes it more likely for that penalty to be called and that penalty to be engaged. And his helmet hit a quarterback when he was down with at the quarterback's helmet. So that's a penalty. But I think that you need to get some sense of a defender not trying to avoid contact, not even being intentional, but not trying to avoid contact in order for that ejection to occur. And I think Eric Kendricks is very clearly trying to avoid contact there. So I thought the ejection didn't make very much sense at all. Zimmer said he didn't get much clarity from the refs on that one, which big shocker.
What about the other penalty that ended up happening as a result of a hit to Justin Fields, where he took a knee what would appear to be inexplicably? It was just a bad snap next to his own goal line, and he ended up getting tackled by a player who it's apparent that didn't hear the whistle, or B, didn't see that he had taken a knee. Yeah.
Well, so I don't think there was a whistle, first of all. So there wasn't a whistle to hear. That I think that's pretty wild to call a defender for that, because there's a lot of instances where you get penalties where you ask, "Hey, what should the defender have done there?" And there's not really anything a defender physically can do, which sucks. But there are a number of penalties where, according to the letter of the law, you'd have to call it. Otherwise, defenders would put themselves into positions where it would be unavoidable, essentially, to do what they did. So they would intentionally make it seem likely that they could not avoid their trajectory on the way to like roughing the passer or something like that. So you would still need to, by the theory of like the way NFL games are officiated, need to call those penalties to prevent future situations where you wouldn't be able to tell intent, right? So I get that. Sometimes that a defender takes a penalty that is, by the physics of football, impossible to avoid, right? It sucks. But there is an argument for it. Here, I don't think so. And it's not just because James Lynch could not have known, right? Which I don't know that he would have known. But also, I don't think it's clear that he's giving himself up, right? Because not only for the situational reason, it's 1st and 10 on a comeback drive from deep in your own territory. It would have been a 7-yard loss, a knee, right? For a 7-yard loss. And it's not even marked in the rule book or in the play-by-play right now as a kneel, right? It's marked as a negative rush. That I don't think it's clear that he's giving himself up. It very much looks like a juke move, right? And so he just looks like he's scrambling, and that absolutely should not have been called a penalty. So it's not even just that James Lynch couldn't have known. I think that Fields did not do enough to demonstrate that he's giving, because the knee like touches the ground for like a microsecond. Like, there are quarterbacks that go to the ground in the backfield to avoid damage all the time. I mean, Strahan's record-setting sack was on one of those, right? When Favre just went to the ground. That happens a lot, right? It doesn't happen in every game or even every week, but it happens a lot. And a quarterback taking a kneel like that is bizarre. Like, a lot of quarterbacks just go to the ground and turtle over a little bit, and that counts as giving yourself up. And it very much prevents someone from trying to pick you up and put you down, because after he takes the quote-unquote knee for like half a second, he gets back up, and that's when Lynch hits him. Lynch doesn't hit him when he's like down or anything like that. He gets back up, and Lynch hits him. And the worst thing, I think, from Lynch's perspective, even if he sees this knee happen, right, because we've seen plays where there are fake knees. Like, we've seen that, right? So the worst part is the quarterback gets up from that knee that doesn't even look like a kneel and then makes a play as you let up, right? So I can't see that being the correct way to officiate that. That's crazy to me.
Well, you hear
that's
players,
another example.
Players play to the whistle. Like, you hear that often. You have to play until the whistle.
Yeah, and there's no whistle indicating.
There's no damn whistle. There's nothing. All there is a stupid penalty that didn't. All right. So
that was an 81-yard drive, by the way. It didn't matter because the Bears can't find ways to score, but it did matter.
Well, we've talked about the refs. We continue to talk about the refs. Let's talk about the Bears outgaining the Vikings in every capacity.
Yeah. So whether it's on the ground, right? The Bears had more yards per carry from the running backs and more yards per carry on the ground generally than the Vikings did. Whether it's in the air, they obviously had more yards they had more yards total passing, but they also had twice as many yards per attempt. The Bears just did better than the Vikings on offense. Obviously, they didn't finish, they couldn't score, and they didn't convert the red zone appearances into field goals or anything like that. So the score on the field is, whatever. The score on the scoreboard is whatever. But the Bears just couldn't convert. They're much better offensive execution. And going forward, right, this would be concerning. If we didn't have a history of the Vikings doing a little bit better in previous games. The only thing that the Bears were worse at was, I think, third down and penalties, right? So I guess turnovers too. So there are three kind of really significant parts of the game that impacted the way that the Bears were able to execute, right? So they had 4 fumbles, they lost 3 of them, which that's another thing that the refs, I think, did a poor job of. They kept whistling these plays dead before the players could fight for the fumble. So, for example, on the Fields fumble that he did recover, they probably should not have whistled that play dead, even though Fields did initially recover it, because in the NFL, it's not who recovers it first, it's who has it recovered last. And so you would have had to fight that, which I don't think is a very good rule, by the way. I think that it invites a lot of extracurricular activity in the pile and stuff like that. And it doesn't really make sense within the rules of football, but whatever, right? That is kind of how it's officiated in the NFL. In college, it's whoever, if they get it and then they're down, right? And so it's a little bit different in college. But in the NFL, if you fight for it in a scrum, you're fighting for it in a scrum. That was kind of part of the difference, is that the Bears only committed a couple more penalties, but their penalties were a little bit more, I guess, egregious. They had 40 more yards of penalties than the Vikings, or thereabouts, like 38 more yards than the Vikings. So that's part of it. They committed 2 more turnovers on the ground. I think if we take a look at, was it because Cousins had, you have the 1 interception or the 2? No, he had 2 interceptions, right? No, he had 1 interception and the Bears had 0. So the net turnovers is like +1 in favor of the Vikings. Or I guess the net takeaways is +1 for the Vikings. So it's a significant but not enormous difference. And then you add in, some of the special team stuff where the Vikings are a little bit better on special teams. You add in the 4th down stuff where the Bears turned it over on downs. If you count those as turnovers, that's huge. And it begins to overcome the fact that the Bears, average way more per play. I think they average 5.5 or 5.3 or something like that yards per play, whereas the Vikings averaged 3.2, right? Like that's how that difference occurs, is the 3 turnovers on downs, the 3 fumbles versus the 1 interception and the 1 fumble, which I don't think the Vikings even lost that fumble. So, because like Brian O'Neill recovered it or something like that.
Yeah, it was fallen on, yeah.
Yeah, so like that doesn't even. But the Vikings, punted way more, right? I mean, that's like the reason the Bears went for it on 4th down so much is because they were so deep in Vikings territory that it made sense for them to go for it instead of punting or kicking. And so the Vikings ended up with 4 more punts, one of which you could almost count as a turnover because it was, I guess technically it's not blocked because the punt crossed the line of scrimmage, but it was deflected, right? It was a pretty bad looking punt. Because the punt protection unit did not do its job and the Bears got through. So it's not even on Jordan Berry necessarily, unless the timing was off. So you could count that kind of as a turnover in the other direction. The Bears were just a better team in the ways that tend to replicate themselves going forward, like yards per play, yards per pass, even yards per carry, which is a lot less stable. And it's just kind of some kind of fluky plays, honestly, that made like the first Justin Fields fumble, the Cameron Dancer forced, it's kind of wild. Like it just kind of happened, right? And I don't think that that's going to be a consistent problem. That kind of fumble anyway is going to be a consistent problem for the Bears or a consistent feature of the Vikings defense going forward. So a lot of lucky things bounced in the Vikings way, which is not really the way you would think about this game, having looked at it. Like you wouldn't look at this game and go, yeah, the Vikings were definitely lucky. But, honestly, the bad calls that hurt the Bears more than they hurt the Vikings, so they definitely hurt both teams for sure. We just talked about it. But the bad calls hurt the Vikings less. The fluky turnovers were more in the Vikings' favor. The 4th down stuff, just the Bears couldn't get out of their own way on 4th down. So those were kind of the biggest things, is the Bears didn't come out with points on those. And again, if they had made the wrong decision essentially and kicked a field goal every single time, they would have had a final drive where all they needed was a field goal, and they probably would have gotten it, right? Because they were close enough for that final touchdown. So, yeah.
Well, Kirk Cousins also couldn't find a receiver to save his life, and it's entirely possible that Mason Cole and Christian Darrisaw should be investigated for crimes against Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, Darrisaw had a really bad game. I know, like, some people were saying that Kirk Cousins should have stepped up in the pocket on that first sack, but, like, whatever, man. Darrisaw got thrown. That's a pass rush loss for sure. He had a bad game. Mason Cole had an even worse game, mostly against Akeem Hicks, but, I mean, he had problems everywhere. Cousins was sacked 4 times. I want to say 2 of them were by Akeem Hicks or Mason Cole related problems. Yeah, it was a bad showing from the pass protection unit, and those two in particular played a pretty big role. And I know that Ezra Cleveland had a couple of big mistakes as well. I didn't pay enough attention to Garrett Bradbury, Brian O'Neill to see kind of how they were doing because everyone else was just such a disaster that it was kind of easy to see that, which prevented him in some cases from going through his reads. So Justin Jefferson still had 10 targets in the game. So from a pure target perspective, he did really well. He ended up with a touchdown as well. But honestly, obviously, he had 4 receptions, 47 yards. The fact that he threw to Jefferson in the red zone, it means that he ended up getting a touchdown. But for the most part, we didn't see the production that we're used to seeing out of Jefferson. But, a lot of it has to do with either the pressure or a bad choice by Kirk Cousins or like some pretty significant inaccuracy. This was not a game where like Justin Fields did really poorly, like in a lot of ways. It's kind of wild that he finished with like 1 touchdown, no picks, 7.3 yards per attempt, 67 completion, like very bog standard average level stats, right? He played poorly. But his stats should have been better because he suffered from a number of drops that he shouldn't have, especially in the fourth quarter. And so it's kind of weird. And, they lost more of those contested catches than they should have. So it's kind of weird that his statistical line still overstates his level of play in this game. And mind you, these statistics don't usually account for stuff like taking 10-yard sacks and stuff like that. But it is kind of crazy. Cousins didn't experience that many problems from a drop perspective, at least from what I could see. He just wasn't getting the ball to the right spots. And a lot of the plays where he's dumping it off to Tyler Conklin or Amir Smith-Marset or whatever, he might be making the right choice by the design of the play, but he should probably, his comfort with Jefferson should allow him to give Jefferson a couple more dangerous throws. By dangerous, I don't mean hurt him throws like with Conklin, but rather dangerous like this is aggressive, right? Like the one that ended up in a pick last week against the Steelers where Devin Bush deflected it. That's a kind of dangerous throw. Maybe that one's a little bit too dangerous. That one's kind of a weird pick to throw, but like one deep downfield, right, where there's going to be a contested situation, like the one that he threw to Deion Bush, where Justin Jefferson wasn't there. But in order to give Justin Jefferson a chance, he has to like give them he has to have a chance to give, right? So it was kind of weird. Throw it to Jefferson more. It's kind of a weird thing to say as a game with 10 targets, but he just did not find his receivers until late in the game, and that really hamstrung the offense.
And Smith-Marset rather did end up picking up a touchdown. So
yeah,
that was
he got a touchdown.
Fun little moment for him. DJ Wanham. There's a guy.
He's definitely a dude. Obviously, he had a great statistical showing, right? There's no question about that. I don't think he had a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm not trying to say he was secretly bad and he just ended up with 3 sacks. And in fact, it's important to note that on that last sack, it was just because of his pure athleticism that they were able to get that, right? So the fact that he was able to force Fields out of bounds, good job, right? So Wanham did a couple of things right. But it is kind of funny because a lot of these sacks are really just on Justin Fields, and Wanham was the nearest available defender to take advantage of it. So like the second sack, if Fields doesn't drop back 14 yards and instead he steps up a little bit, there's no chance Wanham has for that sack. That first sack, Fields should just get rid of the ball. Like that is not an instance where the defender demonstrated the kind of closing speed on a sack that you would typically, turn a pressure into a sack. Wanham has been statistically playing a little bit better these past couple of games, and so we might actually see him kind of turn the corner a little bit. But I just want to be careful because Wanham had a pretty good end of the season last year, right? And the Vikings were so impressed by it that they signed Everson Griffin, right? So I'll be careful. It's great that he got those 3 sacks. I hope he has a bonus in his contract that he just hit because he's got like 6 sacks for the season, so a lot of bonuses occur at 5 sacks. Hopefully he got a 6th sack or enough to trigger a bonus so he can get paid. But in terms of trying to figure out if he can be kind of a starting defender for the Vikings going forward, I don't think so. I think that he benefited a little bit from Justin Fields' style of play.
It is fun to watch Justin Fields get sacked, and I don't just mean that in a, like mean sense of the word. I truly mean
he takes entertaining sacks. Yeah,
it really that they take you on a journey. It's fun to watch his brain like melt down. Like, if I keep running backwards, I'll eventually tire the defender out because I can run faster backwards than he can forwards. Like, that's the only thought I can think of as he's going backwards like 14 yards.
Yeah, a really kind of edge of your seat moment. It could mean disaster or something phenomenal about to happen, and there's no in between. It's just going to be crazy good or crazy bad for somebody.
It's his sacks are just the most beautiful things.
They're art, yeah.
Oh, that's just art. Let's talk about the clock shenanigans, because once again, a game this weekend was potentially ruined by clock shenanigans.
Yeah, Mike Zimmer said, that's all I'm going to say about the clock at the end of the game in Chicago. But the touchdown obviously didn't matter, but he thought that the game should have ended a play earlier, as the receiver was going out of bounds. But it just kind of held on 1 second for a little bit longer. There's been a history of clock problems in Chicago. We asked about it at the presser last week. I was trying to figure out, it was last Thursday we asked him about it at the presser. And, there have been a number of ones, like when the play clock turned off while Teddy Bridgewater was trying to lead a comeback drive. So that was way back in, I want to say 2015, to just kind of a number of clock problems over the years. And so this one where it kind of held on maybe that 1 second for a little bit too long, which I haven't verified. Like, I don't know for a fact. I didn't stopwatch it or anything like that, but it was weird to me live. But I just chalked that up to kind of being lucky, I guess. I didn't really think about it too much. I thought it was weird and notable. But yeah, they should not have been able to run that final play. But the universe willed it. The universe decided that the Vikings would have a one-score game. The only team weird enough to defy the one-score rule for the Vikings this year are the Seahawks, and of course they are.
Yeah, it's the great magnet. You'd be fooled to try to fight it. All right. I'm done talking about this game. Are you? What else can you really walk away from, knowing other than this is yet another Vikings win that feels so much like a loss that I feel like an idiot being mad about it?
It's hollow. The Vikings have technically improved their playoff odds. I will need to continue as a part of my job talk about the Vikings' playoff odds. And that feels like a lie. It feels like I should not be allowed to do that. But hey, it's in the cards. Anything is possible. So yeah, it's a hollow game. Take this film and burn it. I think if you're one of the Vikings players, the Vikings have been better in kind of all stages in other games for most of the season than they were in this game. You could say that the defense kind of led the Vikings to this win over the offense, and I guess technically that's true, but the defense failed less is not a super encouraging headline.
What's crazy to me is that on Sunday, the Vikings are going to play the Rams. The Rams are a decent team this year.
Yeah, no good teams, but the Rams are pretty close to what one might consider a good team.
And they are going to play like they would demolish the Vikings team that played tonight. I can't guarantee that, but that's the way they've done it this year.
Yeah, I mean, we saw them do it to the Cardinals. We saw them beat the Packers. We saw them do it to the Ravens. We've seen this team take on good teams and keep it within one score. Keep these games genuinely one score, not like the Chicago game, but close, teams that we have considered to be pretty good. The Chargers game, right? The Chargers are in it, right? We just saw what Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes were doing to each other in their primetime game this week, right? The Vikings have beaten good teams. Have gotten close to good teams. They've got another good team coming up.
Here's why I sound so frustrated and flustered throughout this game. and throughout this recap, and really throughout this night, you can't wrap your head around this in order to try to cover it. This isn't a traditional NFL team. This isn't a team where you can go, I know exactly what they're going to do. Or if you say that you know exactly what they're going to do, you're just admitting that it's just going to end up being chaos. Like that, it doesn't work like that. This isn't a normal team. You don't know which team is going to end up showing up. You don't know if the defense is actually going to work. You don't know if Kirk Cousins is going to throw for more than 90 yards. Like, this is not, you don't know if this is going to be a team that's going to need to be bailed out 3 times on 3rd down by the refs in a drive. And this is not the first time this has happened this season. We got a question in the mailbag that said, was this the worst performance for the Vikings this season? I don't even know if it's the worst one over the last month. And yet,
yeah, I mean, it might be, though. But yeah, the fact that it's a pretty good question.
Like, this is just it's so hard to cover. It's so hard to like wrap your head around, because the moment that you think you kind of have an understanding as to what this team is, and you can get that from the Thursday night game, it's all wiped out now. Like, Kirk Cousins might be able to throw the ball. Cook is still able to run it, but why? Thielen's leg might pop off at any moment. And you know what? That would be perfectly in tune with everything we have seen this year.
Yeah. I mean, it's entirely possible that against the Rams, Thielen's probably going to play, and he plays the Rams and his leg pops off mid-play. He scores a touchdown, and then he tries to get back in the game, and he ends up with 200 yards without a leg.
And you know what?
That feels entirely within the realm of possibility at this point.
Like, I realize the whole like Ben DiNucci opening of last week, but like all things are truly possible at this point.
Indeed, we have unlocked the cursed key, right? Like we've divined the essential nature of the universe, and the rest of us have to suffer for having done so.
I don't know what is going to happen with the rest of this season. The internet seems to want to tell me that this is a playoff team. I'll believe them for the moment, because that could change sometime tomorrow afternoon when Washington plays. I don't even know what to say about this team other than they absolutely positively cannot be trusted. It's All right, let's move on to something. I feel like you're going to defend this, so let's start this off with the analytics nerds have taken a real beating over the past 2 weeks, and it seems to be revolving around the Ravens more than most teams. But let's talk a little bit about what happened at the end of the Ravens game and why this isn't necessarily the analytics community's fault as to why this happened.
Yeah. So I feel like the way the Ravens approached that end of game decision is like grossly mischaracterized. I think just because it is not the direction that it typically goes, that people think it's an analytics decision, and it's not. It's just I would rather win it now than in overtime. Have you seen Aaron Rodgers play? Half my team is missing decision, and not like the nerds tell me that, my odds are better on this one than that one. I think people just assume it's an analytics decision, and I don't think it is, because I think that if you had listened to the analytics nerds, you would have gone for 2 when you were down 8 when you scored the previous touchdown, not at this point, right? The analytics nerds tell you to go for 2 in that scenario because you now have more information about how many possessions you need, right? Because guess what? They missed their 2 opportunity, right? They missed their 2-point attempt. And so they were down 1, and they had, 40 seconds left to resolve that. And unfortunately they couldn't, right? They lost. So they lost because they didn't have any time to make up that extra possession. But if they had missed that 2-point attempt earlier in the game, they would have known, I'm going to need 9 points. So I'm going to need a touchdown and a field goal. And I can manage my drives knowing that. So I'm going to run a faster offense. I'm not going to try to drain the clock to prevent Aaron Rodgers from getting on the field. I know that I'm going to need an onside kick somewhere, or I'm going to need a turnover somewhere. So I'm going to play my defense a little bit differently, and which is not quite the same thing in 40 seconds as it is with 140 left. So I don't think it's an analytics decision, because the analytics decision would have been on the previous drive. Here it's just, yeah, man, we don't have players. We're out of them. And Aaron Rodgers seems to do pretty well at the end of games. So I'm not going to kick an extra point. I'm going to go for 2. In fact, analytics nerds are still arguing about it. They're still trying to figure out if it was a good decision, because you don't know what Aaron Rodgers is going to do on the response drive, because there is a thought that Rodgers would not take it to overtime, that he would try to win in the final 40 seconds of the game if it had been tied. And in that case, it's not the same as trying to take it to overtime. Your odds of winning in overtime are 50%, right? Your odds of Rodgers trying to win it with 40 seconds left, if you tie it, are above 0%. And so your odds of winning are therefore below 50%, because you could either lose in the final drive or you could lose in overtime. And so you stack those odds basically on top of each other. And you might have a losing percentage of like 60%, right? And so if you think you're going to make it more than half the time on the 2-point conversion, yeah, maybe that is analytically the right move. But the nerds don't know. We don't know how Rodgers would approach it, right? Because if he'd tied it up, he might have taken it to overtime, because most coaches want to take it to overtime. Rodgers is a quarterback that tends not to adjust his style of play until you have to throw a Hail Mary. That's one of the reasons he's one of the lowest in pick rate in end-of-game situations. And so maybe he would have tried to play a normal offense to get there, to get into field goal range. I don't know. So I don't think that that's an analytical decision at all. I think it's we're going to win it now and not take a depleted roster and play another 10 minutes of football, potentially get more injured, and allow Rodgers to take advantage of all the experience he has against all these new players. So that's that. The second thing is the discussion around analytics these past 2 weeks has been like mind-boggling, because all these people have to do is ask somebody in an analytics department some of these questions that they have, or some of the objections that they have. Like Andrew Brandt, for example, who's a former NFL agent and could very easily talk to any team about their analytical decisions, including the Ravens, who have talked about this for the last 3 years, asked questions like, do the analytics account for the fact that Tyler Huntley is in there and not Lamar Jackson? And like, yeah, maybe Ben Baldwin's model doesn't, right? The fourth down bot, that one doesn't. That's fine. But I guarantee you the Ravens one does. Like, the complicated analytical models that are being employed by teams that have embraced analytics like the Ravens, who, by the way, I mean, look, we've talked about the Chargers' decision to go for 2, which didn't work out this past game, but actually worked out for them, or go for it on fourth down. Didn't work out this past game, but actually led to a number of wins that they wouldn't have had otherwise in previous games that no one's talking about. The models inside those departments do take into account all of these variables that people want them to take into account. So 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, Harbaugh held a press conference where he was asked about this question, like, what does it take into account? And he said, every week we've got a new model, because we have to take into account, the players that we have, the players that they're playing. We have to get a good understanding of who the backups are when they come in. So all of the questions that they had, we need to account for the weather. And so the model needs to be updated for the weather that's going to be there on game day. We need to account for the direction that we're playing in. So we need 2 different models for the direction that we're playing in. And we need to make sure that that aligns with how well we've been playing over the course of the game, because we're getting beat up front. That's going to change our priors or our assumptions. And so he is talking about all the things that people talk about in terms of what the models don't typically take into account. Like, yeah, I would hope that a team doesn't use a publicly available, quickly cobbled together model. This isn't even a shade on Ben Baldwin. He would agree with me. A publicly available, quickly cobbled together model based off of historical averages over the last 20 years. I would hope that they wouldn't do that. I would hope that they would use the internal model from the team that they hired to do analytics, right? They do take into account that stuff. In fact, there's even an analytical model used by Edge Sports, the people that recently bought Football Outsiders. Their model takes into account who's playing when they recommend to go for it, and that model spits out answers live on their Twitter feed at Edge Sports. And so they do take into account who's in the game. It's just weird to me that they can ask these questions without asking anybody these questions, right? Like 2 weeks ago, Phil Simms and a couple of other people Nate Burleson was there too, were like, yeah, I'd like to ask these nerds. I think this is in response to the Chargers one, why you would go for it. You know what? I don't know. I don't care. Which like tells you a lot about the receptiveness to these questions, but also like, then do it, man. Like you can just ask people this, like that. You don't have to just say on TV, yeah, I bet they don't have an answer to this question. A lot of the analytics people have played football, like not just Eric Eager, who I think a lot of people would not trust anymore based off of how hot his takes are. But like the person running the Vikings analytics department, he's a football guy. Not only has he played football, he's a pro scout. He was like a film scout for years for the Vikings. Like that's who's in a lot of these departments. The Eagles analytics department was built by somebody who played football in a D1 school, right? Like this is like, people are like, this is happening. So I just kind of wanted to get it off my chest. I forced James to put this section in there, but the conversation surrounding it is weird because it's not the spreadsheet told me to do it, I should do it. It's I don't want to injure my I've only got half my players available to me roster, including not my starting quarterback decision. But even if it was, the coach has a ton of input into what goes into the model and what to take into account. So that's my rant there.
Well, clearly they would ask the questions of the analytics department if they weren't busy doing the laundry for the team.
Yeah, that's right.
Like if they were available, they could talk to him.
Yeah,
but
they're too busy doing the laundry. Yeah,
they're trying to get the whites whiter and trying to get the grass stains off the jerseys. So it's worth remembering that. Let's go to the mailbag. Let's breeze through some of this. Zen Cupid asks, is this more or less ridiculous than the Josh Freeman game?
Less. The Josh Freeman game was peak ridiculousness. Both teams were trying to lose that game. This game, the Vikings were clearly trying to win. They were just bad at it. Like I don't think there's any question the Vikings were trying to win. They just played poorly. The Josh Freeman game, nuts. Wild. I can't believe the throws I saw like multiple times from both teams. Crazy game.
One day we're going to have to find the entirety of that and sit and watch it.
Yeah, we'll do like a watch along like with the Property Brothers at the 2009 game.
Yeah, it just to sit down and just say we did it. Since the original episode for that was lost due to technical stuff. So we'll have to relive that somehow.
I can't even tell if that's a euphemism.
No, that's literally what happened. Let's go to Festivus on Twitter, who asks, is it safe to watch the Vikings and operate heavy machinery?
Well, aside from the fact that it's probably not safe to watch something while operating heavy machinery, put that aside, still no, absolutely not. I would not want someone to either be as emotional as a Vikings game makes you while operating heavy machinery, or in need of anxiety meds, and then in a place where they operate heavy machinery. Like that seems like the worst possible way to go about handling dangerous equipment.
Kevin Jellerson asks, I was watching the Matrix Revolutions on one screen and this game on the other because I hate myself. Which was the superior viewing experience?
Man, okay, I'm going to watch Matrix Revolutions with Chelsea and my brother during Christmas. I don't know if we'll watch it in a theater. My brother is very, very worried about COVID. Of course, I'm going to like sporting events every weekend, but we'll see if we'll make it to a theater. So I don't know. I'm hearing that it's a confusing, bloated mess, which that's what I signed up for. Like I don't know what you were expecting, Kevin. That sounds exactly like the fourth Matrix movie that I'd want to see.
Oh no. He's saying he watched the third one.
Jesus Christ.
Let me be perfectly clear. He's saying that he was watching the third one on one screen and the dude.
Oh, actually, if I were going to rank it, I'd say Vikings, Revolutions, 2013 Josh Freeman game. That's in best to worst. So I think the Vikings game is a better viewing experience because you got to watch like some funny moments. And then Revolutions, especially because like Revolutions, I think is only bearable if you're watching it immediately after Reloaded, because they really are just two movies split up and they're so bad separate from each other. I think it's probably, I haven't tested this yet. But I saw a take that was pretty detailed on this, that it might actually be pretty, maybe even good, but pretty watchable if you combine them into one like 6-hour movie or something like that. So you're only watching half a movie that way, which it's a pretty dense movie. So that seems like a bad. You can't have one that's like deeply complicated, that's like really full of itself. Which sometimes I like movies that are full of them. It's like I liked Inception, right? But like this one is deeply full of itself, and also has like half the explanation is in the other movie. That's definitely the superior viewing experience was the Vikings game. But man, I cannot believe the choice you made here.
Yeah, I don't like having guilty pleasures. I think you should admit the things that you like and accept it. I still have problems with the second and third Matrix movies. Like there's moments with the second one that I think it's okay. There are moments of the third one that, if I'm flipping channels and the final fight is about to happen, I'll watch. Like it's dumb, but I'll sit and I'll watch. But like there's a moment in the third Matrix movie where Morpheus is putting down his weapon in front of the machines, and like it makes no sense at all. He's like, Neo is fighting for. No, you don't know any of that. You have it's ugh. I wouldn't suggest either of those, and I think that you should seek therapy. Andrew Shad asks, the Vikings are 3-1 in divisional games, and arguably the worst possible way. Is there a worst possible way?
The fact that the one is to the Lions is nuts.
Wait a second. They didn't tie the. For a second, I thought they had tied the Lions as well. No, that was a loss. Oh God, that's even worse.
Yeah. So they're 1-1 against the Lions, and then 1 against the Packers, 1 against the Bears. That might be the worst possible. I mean, again, technically speaking, the worst possible way is if you were legitimately competing for the division, and so your loss was to the divisional leader, or if you were competing for a wild card spot against somebody who is also in the same division and you lost the head-to-head to them instead. So that would technically be worse because it would reduce the Vikings playoff odds. But this feels like the most pointless 3-1, right? Like, I guess there was a more point. Like, I remember the Raiders went 6-0 in the division one year and then went 8-8 for the season, so they didn't make the playoffs, which is amazing. But so that one, I guess, would be like worse. But like in terms of like feeling like anything is pointless and that the Vikings are hopeless, this is definitely a worst possible 3-1 divisional, especially the way that they won the Bears game. Like the Packers game, that felt good, right? The Bears game, goodness. Yeah. Neither Lions game felt good, obviously.
Paul asks, that Kendricks ejection looked pretty rough. What are the chances he'll end up getting suspended for a game?
I don't know. I don't think he'll get suspended based off of what I had said earlier about the ejection. This is one scenario where I don't love the use of slow motion replay. Like, I think I've talked about this so many times on the podcast, but one of the issues with slow motion replay is that even after your brain accounts for the fact that it's in slow motion, even after it's in slow motion and you try to account for that when you're watching it, no matter what, your brain still imparts a level of intent in slow motion footage that you can't really get out of, that you don't impose when you're watching it at full speed. So there's actually a lot of studies on this about ways that we determine fault on slow motion footage versus not. You just kind of assume a reaction time that is not possible within slow motion. So I actually don't like slow motion for a lot of things in the NFL. I think obviously it's really useful to have in a lot of situations. First, for highlights, because slow motion looks dope. But second, for like, trying to figure out if someone is down for a fumble or something like that, or is cross the plane, or is at the sideline, stuff like that. But stuff that where you are trying to determine a player's intent for a penalty, like unnecessary roughness or unsportsmanlike conduct or something like that, slow motion is like brutally bad. So if he's suspended, I think it's because the NFL overuses slow motion.
All right, next question is going to be from Kyle Slaby, who asks, If the Bears had kicked field goals on the second and third to last drives, that garbage time touchdown could have set up a 2-point conversion to tie. Are analytics for big baby nerds, or am I overthinking things?
I mean, the reason the Bears didn't convert those fourth downs is because they're bad at football, right? Like that's why it happened. So if they had converted one or both of those, the Vikings would be in a lot of trouble. Or if they had kicked field goals on both of those and made them, remember, we don't know that they'll make them. They missed one earlier in the game. But if they had made both of them, I think the Vikings play that final drive way differently. Like, I don't think it's basically a prevent defense the way the Vikings played it up until you get to the red zone. So I think the Vikings play that differently. So I don't know that they would have scored a touchdown. Obviously, because it's the Vikings, you kind of feel like that's inevitable, but you can't really design your game strategy around how inevitable you feel a Vikings collapse is. Like you have to act in a world where that's not your reality, and then it'll become your reality, right? Like Morpheus can't act as if Neo's just going to take care of things. It's just nice if Neo takes care of things. But pick up your weapon, dude. You don't know.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I truly do. Kyle Slaby wants to ruin you, however, by asking, would you rather rewatch this game and then have to write/talk about this game for no financial compensation, or get paid to rewatch and recap Rise of Skywalker?
The financial compensation bit throws a very curious wrench into this. So remember, it is difficult to remember what happened in Rise of Skywalker. It is so tough to think about plot points. So, what was it? Last episode, 2 episodes ago, we were just discovering plot points as our brain palace fed them to us.
It was like 2. It was technically 3. Yeah, because of how many episodes of the post show stuff has gone up. 3 bonus episodes ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were stored away, and since that episode, I can only remember like 2 things, like how stupid the Wayfinder, not even the Wayfinder, the dagger to the Death Star thing is, and I would have to re-jog my memory at all of the things I didn't like about Rise of Skywalker. So it is such a bland nothing of a movie that happens to also be bad. Like, if you're both bland and bad, that's impressive. But there's so many things that happen that they overwhelm each other. That's one of the problems. So, would I rather write and talk about this game for no financial compensation at all, or get paid to rewatch and recap Rise of Skywalker? The only issue I have is that I just know I don't have an audience for the Rise of Skywalker thing, right? Like, if I publish a review of who's reading that, right? Like, who's watching my epic takedown of Rise of Skywalker on YouTube? So that's like, the financial compensation is important, obviously, but like, I know that someone's going to read the Bears thing, even if I don't get paid for it. And I did a bunch of bad Vikings game recaps back when I wasn't getting paid to watch Vikings football. So like, clearly there was something there. I still think I would do the Rise of Skywalker one just because I need to feed myself. So I guess that would be it. But like, I would hate to, like, I get a couple of thousand views on my football stuff. I would get like maybe 200 views, maybe, if I rewatched and recapped Rise of Skywalker. Is this is recap, not even a review? I would have to recap it. Okay, that's worse, actually. Yeah. Okay, yeah, a review, I would at least get some things off my chest. I would work it in. I'd recap it sarcastically.
There you go. Kenneth Allen asks, is there any charitable but still realistic way of understanding Zimmer's post-halftime "we have to run more" mantra? Because I'm generally a Zimmer defender, and I am at a loss here.
There was space in the running game. Like I said, at one point, the Vikings were averaging over 4 yards, 4.4 yards a carry, I think, at halftime. But like, at some point, they were averaging a little bit more than that. And they were throwing at 4.4 yards per attempt. And so in theory, you've got some opportunities to run the ball, whereas throwing the ball, it seems like you're creating more risk, because one of the reasons that passing is more efficient than running is because you get more yards. But there is more inherent risk in passing, right? You're more likely to get a 0-yard play. You're more likely to take a negative play and a sack, and you're more likely to turn the ball over, because fumble rates on running plays are typically under 2%. whereas for interception rates are a little bit higher than 2% typically. So in theory, that actually kind of makes sense given how the Bears were apparently playing the coverages. But Zimmer is seeing 4 defenders take deep parts of the field and opening up space in the running game for Dalvin Cook. So that's why he's saying that. I mean, he doesn't know what the stats are mid-game because he doesn't have like the stat book in front of him. He's understanding kind of what's happening. Obviously, as the game goes on, the coordinators have the relevant information on them, but you usually don't know what your stats are. So, I think that's maybe the charitable. They were given a space, and you run against looks that give you space is the charitable interpretation.
Before we move on to Arif's irony corner, just a brief thing on Patrick Peterson, who I forgot to mention this during the game recap, but the most useful he has been all year, it looked like, was that goal line stand.
Yeah, was it 2 or 3 plays in a row where he was just absolutely crucial?
It was technically 2, but you could argue he was still important on the third.
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal work from Peterson, who I don't think got burned at all at any point in the game either, right? So it was mostly just good plays from Patrick Peterson,
which we'll take. Great.
Yeah, hey,
there's a shining moment in all of this. Fantastic. Patrick Peterson didn't look old playing against these receivers that couldn't catch a cold. I'll take that. Justin Fields apologist asks, for Arif's irony corner, is it funnier if the Giants beat the Bears with Mike Glennon and get Ryan Pace fired, or with Jake Fromm after trading away the Justin Fields pick?
Oh my God. Holy crap. Jake Fromm, because not only did the Giants trade away the Justin Fields pick and end up with Jake Fromm, but also because Jake Fromm and Justin Fields competed against each other in college for the Georgia job. And when Jake Fromm won it, Justin Fields transferred to Ohio State. And I hear Ohio State did better with that. So I think it's Jake Fromm because there's another level on top of it, but both of those are really good. Next
question is from Natalie, who asks, that last play was predestined, wasn't it?
So I don't believe in fate or destiny or a higher power, but yes, you're right. It was. The last play was predestined.
Yeah,
it's a scientific physical property of the Vikings. So it's science, not magic.
In every universe, in every timeline, that last play happens. I'm sorry. Yeah. It's just the way it is. Ian Polly asks, also for the last second Christmas dinner corner, I have increasing pressure to buy a shrink-wrapped, boneless, quote, prime rib from Walmart, where I can get a fresh prime rib ribeye roast from Costco at the same price. Am I crazy thinking that the fresh option is better? I'm going to smoke into a reverse sear. I got tagged to do a roast relatively late in the game. I know a ribeye roast isn't as favorable as a genuine prime rib, but I don't have faith in anything shrink-wrapped by Walmart, even at the last minute.
This is an interesting conundrum. So one of the things about prime rib is that you can only call it prime rib if it passed the inspection process to make it prime. And so it's not choice, it's not select, it's prime. And so you are guaranteed, as much as you can be guaranteed anything, but you're guaranteed, even if it's from Walmart, a certain level of marbling in there. So you're definitely going to get that. That's not the only factor that determines the quality of a meat product. There's a meat judging competitions for a reason, which if you haven't gone to a land-grant university, you must be wondering what the hell I'm talking about. I went to one, and I still am not entirely sure. But
I worked at one, and I actually do know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But there's a lot of ways that that the quality of meat can vary outside of the marbling of the fat inside of it. I don't think that the ribeye roast is that bad of an option, like in terms of quote unquote favorable as genuine prime rib. But I would say you're probably not going to do yourself wrong with the shrink wrapped prime rib from Walmart, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to trust your instincts. Like if the shrink wrapped boneless prime rib from Walmart is very like pink / whitish versus having a deeper red color, for example, you're going to have less of the meaty taste. So that's like one element there that, who knows, right? I have found that the products that I've gotten at Costco, especially the meat products, are of really high quality, generally speaking. And so I've enjoyed that a lot. So I would go with the Costco one because I think you're going to end up with a really good product if you use the ribeye roast, just period. I don't know about the boneless prime rib. I suspect it will be good, but if we want to play the odds, I think you just get the Costco one.
As somebody who doesn't have direct access to a Costco, but does have access to a pretty good butcher shop, I was unable to find something that was going to end up working out for a roast like that last year. And so last year I ended up doing the Walmart bone-in ribeye roast that was listed as it wasn't listed as prime, which I wasn't expecting, but it was choice and wasn't bad. It was fairly decent. It would have been better if I would have been able to like dry age it a little bit or just age it a little bit more. But you don't really have that much of an option considering what you're dealing with as far as your turnaround right now. Like you'd basically be wanting to salt it as you're listening to this episode. So it is something that you can do, but if you have the option, you might as well just go for it and end up doing the Costco thing. Let's go to Don from Ohio, who finishes this episode with for a Reeves Christmas gift for the wife corner. Apparently, the main Christmas gift I bought my wife was a smart Keurig coffee maker, which she can program the machine to make her coffee right when she wakes up. Since I work nights, this was the perfect gift for her. However, with my new promotion comes a new shift. I now work in the morning shift, which means I can make her coffee every morning and deliver it to her. Oh, this is so nauseating.
He is absolutely newly married. You can feel it coming off this question.
God, I just want to throw donuts at him. Why should he be happy? Should I take this coffee maker back and get her another gift instead, since I'm literally replacing the gift I was going to give her?
All right, my instinct says no, because it's just nice to have coffee made for you. But I am saying this as somebody who makes all the coffee and refuses to get an instant coffee thing, not necessarily just because of the quality. There are some hacks that you can get to get better coffee from coffee pod machines, although the Keurig coffee pods that I've generally gotten have been really low quality. But I like the process of making coffee, and so that's what's different here. So I don't know how much you like the process because I bought an intro burr grinder, an intro level burr grinder that I'm sure Dusty is both proud of and horrified at because it's not $1,000. But the fact that I'm no longer using.
Shout out to him, by the way. He made it to 40 without dying, which he's very proud of today.
Yeah, he is definitely not dead. And is alive and 40 for sure.
Literally,
so
the text I got last night at like 1:01 because he's in Mountain Time.
Oh, right, because he's in Mountain Time. Yeah.
Yep. It was literally, "Look who's not dead at 40!" exclamation point.
Surprised his dungeon gets reception. That's fantastic.
It is. Well, I mean, sometimes. Damian Barrett.
Happy birthday, Dusty.
Damian Barrett never answers those calls, so.
Yeah, right. So if you enjoy the process of making coffee, then I absolutely just make the coffee using. I've got an AeroPress now. I've got a French press. I've got a drip coffee machine that I actually make some really good coffee, and a mocha pot. Those are the ways that I make coffee. It's typically I use the AeroPress now, but if you enjoy that, do that. But if it's just kind of like a thing, I would get the smart coffee maker. And if you really want to be the guy that brings coffee to your wife every morning, which sounds so romantic, and I'm not going to say anything sarcastic about that. I'm glad the two of you are very happy, unlike James.
Boy, that works a couple of different ways.
Yeah. You could still have the smart coffee maker automatically make coffee, and you can just make her breakfast instead and bring that. And that sounds even more magnanimous, right? So you get to use the gift for her. You get to use the gift for yourself. and you get to do something that looks like an even bigger romantic gesture.
Here's where I come in.
Oh, no.
Now, you're in a unique position.
Don, you should stay with your wife no matter what James says next.
No. I'm not. Just because I can't accomplish anything positive in life doesn't mean he can't. What I'm saying is, simply put, he's in a rare place here where he can actually make sure that he evens out what he's paying for her Christmas gift, because he's already seen what the Christmas gift has been to him.
Oh, what? There's a whole narrative arc here.
Yep.
You're right.
So he can make sure to like match whatever is being done here. And if you spent a little too much on the Keurig, then hey, you can chip off a little bit less. That's fine. That's fair, right? You already, in this case, you just happen to know because you were a dirty person and decided to look at the list. So I think this is fair. I should not be giving relationship advice anymore. I don't think I should have been doing it before. I certainly don't feel like I should be doing it now.
I think that the state that you're in is not great for relationship advice, but I think your contributions have generally been fantastic content.
Well, boy, if this isn't turning into the opening song from Bo Burnham's Inside, I don't know what is.
So thanks for subjecting your personal life to our whims, James. And then also, Don, thanks for, litigating your relationship, because sometimes you're trying to win is the problem with some of your questions, Don. And I don't know how much you're trying to win.
Oh, I support those. I totally support those. Like, I
know that seems to be kind of the crux of the issue here. So if the smart Keurig costs slightly more than what you're getting, which apparently you know because you looked, and you want to win, that's another consideration to bring in there. Is that you have, I guess, the equivalent of first mover advantage. Is that kind of what you're competing against, because you very often write in with the assumption that relationships are a competition. So under that framework, this seems like a winning move.
And if you want to just drive it home a little bit more, just make sure that the receipt for this thing comes out of the box as you're opening it.
My God.
That way she can see that you love her more than she loves you, and she'll try harder in the relate. That's how that works, right?
Okay, so that's passive-aggressive, but I think you could be more passive-aggressive. Just buy it on the Amazon account that you two share.
and send it to the old house and have her have to call up Amazon.
Let's all pick it up together. Yeah. No, that's perfect. Yeah. And if it's just below the cost of the 11 gifts that you're getting, right? That was it, right?
9 or something, yeah.
Sure. Man, both of you are doing real well for yourselves. I'm happy for the two of you. Wedding in Hawaii. Just good, great. I'm so happy, Don. No, if that doesn't match the price of those 9 things, A, what are you doing? Come on. B, you could just buy coffee pods to make up the rest of the price.
Yeah, I completely agree with Arif on this. This is a wonderful way to win. Just do that. You're gonna win this Christmas, Don. I can feel it.
All right, winner's mentality.
Yes, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Boy, this went off the rails. Fantastic. We will be back later this week to preview the Rams game, so look out for that. Also, traditionally, we have a Christmas episode every year with kind of with a bunch of kind of clips and all that. I think it's going to end up having to be moved toward New Year's this year for a variety of reasons. So look out around the New Year's time for the best of stuff. That'll be not just the regular feed. The regular listeners will get this bonus episode. It's going to be really fun for you. But the Patreon people get another completely different Christmas episode, New Year's episode. Could get a completely different episode. So if you do like the Arif and James experience, check it out over on patreon.com/NorseCode. Sign up and you'll get access to both of the bonus things for the end of the year. So Arif, what do you have to plug?
Yeah, so over The Athletic, I'm going to go over I don't know, man, my feelings about the game. I'm going to use my readers as therapy, I think, because my editor and I could not figure out what angle to write this game. And then Chad essentially was like, hey, Arif, why don't you write about this weird thing? And I was like, yeah, that sounds like therapy. So that's what's going to happen. You're all going to be my therapist. And also you're going to pay me for that. So I appreciate that. Head over to theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan to help me work through my problems through the lens of a Vikings game.
I feel like that's the opposite way that therapy tends to end up working. Or, you know.
Yeah, but I have a platform. Things are different for me.
Oh, that's right. It's right back to that Mr. Beast tweet about the content creators and
yeah, exactly. Yep.
Welcome to James and Arif's Squid Game. I want to thank everyone for donating to patreon.com/NorseCode to make this possible. Let's break some cookies. All right, that's going to be it for this episode. Again, we will be back later this week to preview the Rams game. So for Reef, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember, the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.